I thought I'd moved on from my billionaire ex-husband's betrayal, but when his family invited me to his wedding, after destroying our marriage, I knew it was time for the truth. Little did they know I'd be bringing someone who would shatter their perfect day and expose their darkest secret. Before we dive into this shocking story of betrayal and karma, smash that like button if you love stories where the truth finally comes to light. And don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Let me paint you a picture of Lucas Hartford, a man who had everything money could buy and the arrogance that came with it. At 55, he wasn't just wealthy. He was Silicon Valley royalty, the kind of billionaire who owned islands and collected art worth more than most people's homes. His tech empire had made him untouchable, or so he thought. But here's the thing about being untouchable. Sometimes life has a way of reaching right through that armor and grabbing you by the throat. It was Celeste, his second wife, who planted the seed that would eventually destroy everything. Picture her, 38, blonde, and polished to perfection, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged on magazine covers. She'd been married to Lucas for 8 years, long enough to feel secure in her position as Mrs. Hartford, but not long enough to understand that security built on someone else's pain never lasts. "We should invite Natalie to Daniel's wedding," she suggested one morning over their breakfast of imported berries and organic coffee that cost more per pound than most people's weekly groceries. Lucas nearly choked on his espresso. Natalie. The name still hit him like a punch to the gut, even after 13 years. His first wife, the woman he'd erased from his life so completely that even mentioning her name felt like summoning a ghost. "That's very mature of you," he managed to say, but inside his mind was racing. Why would Celeste want to invite the woman whose life he'd systematically dismantled during their divorce? The truth was, Celeste felt untouchable. She was younger, more beautiful, and she'd given Lucas something Natalie never could: social status that matched his wealth. Natalie had been a middle-class teacher when Lucas was still building his empire. She'd loved him when he was nobody, raised his son Daniel from the age of 5 after his first wife died, and had been there through every late night and every breakthrough. But by the time Lucas hit his first billion, Natalie's simple elegance felt embarrassing next to the wives of his new circle. So he'd traded her in, fought viciously for custody of Daniel, and built a new life where Natalie Phillips Hartford had never existed. The invitation arrived at Natalie's tiny apartment in Portland 3 weeks later, and I can only imagine what went through her mind when she saw that familiar Hartford crest embossed in gold. She was 48 now, her dark hair showing threads of silver, her hands marked by years of teaching elementary school children whose parents couldn't afford private tutors. The woman who had once hosted dinner parties for tech moguls now lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery, grading papers by lamplight. But it wasn't just Natalie who saw that invitation. 12-year-old Sophia was doing her homework at the kitchen table when the fancy envelope arrived, and her curiosity was immediate and intense. "Mom, who's getting married?" she asked, her green eyes, startlingly bright against her olive skin, fixed on the invitation. Natalie's hands trembled as she read the elegant script announcing Daniel's wedding to Victoria Ashworth at the Hartford estate in the Hamptons. Daniel, the boy she'd raised as her own son, who'd called her mom for 8 years until a judge decided that love wasn't enough to compete with biological ties and unlimited legal resources. He was 25 now, a man she'd watched grow up from a distance through carefully gathered social media glimpses and society page photos. The last time she'd seen him, he was 12, the same age Sophia was now. "Can we go, Mom?" Sophia asked, and something in her voice made Natalie look up sharply. There was a longing there, a curiosity about the life her mother had left behind. Sophia had always been wise beyond her years, perhaps because she'd grown up watching her mother piece together a life from the fragments of what remained after the Hartford hurricane had passed through. That night, Natalie made a decision that would change everything. She would attend Daniel's wedding. She would face Lucas Hartford for the first time in 13 years, and she would bring Sophia with her because it was time her daughter understood where she came from. Even if she could never fully understand why they'd had to leave, neither of them had any idea that this decision would expose a secret that had been buried for over a decade, or that one little girl's face would unravel everything Lucas had built his new life upon. The morning of Daniel's wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect September day that money can't buy but somehow always seems to appear for Hartford family events. I can picture Natalie standing in front of the mirror in their modest hotel room, adjusting the navy blue dress she'd found on clearance. Elegant but understated, the kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention but still maintained her dignity. Beside her, Sophia fidgeted with the hem of her simple white dress, her dark hair pulled back to reveal the delicate features that would soon turn one man's world upside down. The drive to the Hartford estate took them through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until they reached the imposing gates that Natalie remembered all too well. The same wrought iron barriers that had once welcomed her as the lady of the house now felt like the entrance to a fortress designed to keep people like her out. As their modest rental car joined the parade of Bentleys and Maseratis winding up the circular drive, I imagine Sophia's eyes grew wide at the sheer scale of wealth on display. The mansion itself was exactly as Natalie remembered, a sprawling testament to excess with manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than she made in a year. 500 guests mingled on the perfectly landscaped grounds, their designer gowns and tailored suits creating a sea of understated luxury. This was Lucas's world now, and Natalie felt every bit the outsider she'd become. But it was the whispers that hit hardest. As they made their way through the crowd, conversations paused and heads turned. These people remembered the scandalous divorce, the custody battle that had filled the society pages for months. They remembered how Lucas Hartford had systematically destroyed his first wife's reputation, painting her as a gold digger who had tried to take half of everything he'd built. Now here she was, walking back into their world with quiet dignity and a daughter whose presence raised immediate questions. Celeste appeared first, gliding toward them with the practiced smile of a hostess who just realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Up close, she was even more stunning than her photos suggested, but there was something sharp in her eyes as they fixed on Sophia. "Natalie," she said, her voice honey-sweet with an edge of steel, "how wonderful that you could make it, and this must be your daughter." The moment Lucas saw them, everything changed. I can imagine him standing there in his perfectly tailored morning coat, champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips, as his eyes locked onto the little girl beside his ex-wife. At first glance, Sophia was just another child at a wedding. Pretty, well-behaved, unremarkable. But as Lucas looked closer, the resemblance hit him like a physical blow. The eyes were unmistakable, that unusual shade of deep green that ran in the Hartford bloodline. The stubborn set of her jaw was pure Hartford determination, but it was the way she tilted her head when she was curious. The exact gesture he'd seen in mirrors his entire life that made his blood run cold. This wasn't coincidence. This was genetics making itself known in the most public way possible. Daniel's reaction was different but equally telling. At 25, he was polished and successful, but when he saw Natalie, the boy she'd raised broke through the man's composure. Their embrace was awkward but genuine, years of separation heavy between them. When he met Sophia, his confusion was evident. Something about her was familiar, but he couldn't place what. The wedding ceremony itself became a study in barely contained tension. As Daniel and Victoria exchanged vows, Lucas found himself unable to focus on his son's happiness. His eyes kept drifting to Sophia, cataloging every familiar feature, every gesture that screamed Hartford heritage. The little crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left ear, visible when she tucked her hair back, was the final piece of evidence he didn't want to acknowledge. But it was old Mrs. Hartford, Lucas's 80-year-old aunt, who voiced what everyone was beginning to notice. During the cocktail hour, her wavering voice cut through the polite conversation. "My goodness, that child looks exactly like Lucas did at that age. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. It's like looking at a photograph." The comment rippled through the assembled guests like a stone thrown into still water. Conversations faltered as people began to really look at Sophia, then at Lucas, then back again. The math wasn't difficult. A 12-year-old girl with Hartford features at the ex-wife's side. Suddenly, the generous invitation felt less like magnanimity and more like the universe orchestrating its own form of justice. Karma, it seemed, had excellent timing. The reception was in full swing when Lucas finally couldn't take it anymore. I can picture him moving through the crowd like a man possessed, his usual composed demeanor cracking with each step. The orchestra played, guests laughed and clinked glasses, but all Lucas could see was that little girl with his eyes, his chin, his family's unmistakable birthmark. The weight of realization was crushing him, and he needed answers before he completely lost his mind. He found Natalie standing alone near the rose garden, watching Sophia chase fireflies with some of the other children. Even in the fading twilight, there was no mistaking the resemblance between the little girl and the man approaching with barely controlled fury. "We need to talk," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now!" Natalie turned, and for a moment I imagined she saw not the billionaire who had destroyed her life, but the man she'd once loved desperately. 13 years had been kind to Lucas. Money had a way of preserving people, but there was something haunted in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Lucas," she said quietly, as if she'd been expecting this moment for years. "Don't," he snapped, moving closer. "Don't you dare act like this is some casual reunion. That little girl, Sophia, she's mine, isn't she?" The words hung in the air between them like an accusation, and Natalie's slight flinch told him everything he needed to know even before she spoke. "Lucas, please, not here, not now." But her voice lacked conviction, and Lucas pressed harder, his desperation making him cruel. "She has the birthmark, Natalie. The Hartford birthmark. How many people have you seen with that exact marking? And those eyes, my God, those are my mother's eyes." He was spiraling now, 13 years of carefully constructed new life crumbling around him. "How long have you been planning this? This revenge?" That's when Natalie's composure finally broke. "Revenge?" Her voice rose, drawing glances from nearby guests. "You think I planned this? You think I wanted to bring my daughter to the place where her father's family would look at her like she's some kind of inconvenience?" The truth came pouring out then, 13 years of buried pain and regret spilling into the rose-scented air. She told him about that last night before their divorce was finalized, when he'd shown up at her door with tears in his eyes, talking about mistakes and second chances. One night of passion born from grief and loss. The last time they'd touched before the lawyers made it all official. "I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks later," Natalie whispered, her voice breaking. 6 weeks after you'd already married Celeste. 6 weeks after you'd made it clear that I was nothing more than an embarrassing chapter in your success story." Lucas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "You should have told me. You should have." "Told you what?" Natalie's laugh was bitter. "That your perfect new marriage was built on a lie? That your society wife wasn't the only woman carrying your child? I tried, Lucas. I called, I wrote letters. But Celeste made sure I never got through to you. She had your assistant screen everything. Made sure my name never appeared on your calendar again." The realization hit Lucas like a physical blow. Celeste had known. She'd intercepted every attempt Natalie had made to reach him, had systematically erased any chance he might have had to know about his daughter. 12 years of birthdays, school plays, scraped knees, and bedtime stories, all stolen from him by the woman he'd chosen over the life he'd already built. But their heated argument had attracted attention, and it was Sophia herself who interrupted them, her young face streaked with tears. "Stop it," she said, her voice small but firm. "Just stop fighting about me like I'm not even here." Both adults turned to stare at the little girl who had just shattered their world. In the golden light of the garden torches, her resemblance to Lucas was undeniable, but it was her dignity, so much like her mother's, that struck him most. "I heard what you said," Sophia continued, looking directly at Lucas. "You're my father. But you don't want me, do you? Just like all the other fathers who don't want their kids." And in that moment, Lucas Hartford realized that karma hadn't just brought his past to his son's wedding. It had brought him face to face with everything he'd lost, everything he'd thrown away, and everything he could never get back. What happens when a 12-year-old girl becomes the wisest person in a room full of adults? Sophia Hartford, and yes, she was a Hartford now, whether anyone wanted to acknowledge it or not, stood in that rose garden looking at the two people who had created her and then spent years running from the consequences. The tears on her cheeks caught the light from the garden torches, but her voice was steady as she spoke words that would haunt Lucas for the rest of his life. "I don't need a father who's ashamed of me," she said, her green eyes, his eyes, meeting Lucas's gaze without flinching. "And I don't need a mother who thinks she has to hide me from the world. I've been fine without you for 12 years. I can keep being fine." The simplicity of her statement hit harder than any accusation could have. Here was a child who had grown up knowing she was different, knowing there were questions about her father that her mother couldn't answer, and she'd built her own strength from that uncertainty. She wasn't begging for acceptance or demanding explanations. She was simply stating facts with the kind of clarity that comes from growing up too fast. Lucas felt something crack inside his chest as he looked at this remarkable little girl, his daughter, who had inherited not just his features, but apparently his mother's steel spine. For 13 years, he'd told himself that his divorce from Natalie was necessary, that he'd had to choose between his past and his future. But looking at Sophia now, he realized he hadn't just lost a wife in that divorce. He'd lost the chance to raise this incredible human being. Meanwhile, inside the reception tent, Celeste was having her own reckoning. She'd pieced together enough of the conversation to understand exactly what was happening, and the woman who had felt so secure in her position as Mrs. Hartford was now facing the reality that her marriage had been built on a foundation of lies and intercepted phone calls. The guests were beginning to whisper more openly now. The Hartford family resemblance impossible to ignore once you knew what to look for. But it was Daniel who surprised everyone. Lucas's son, Sophia's half-brother, had been watching the drama unfold from the terrace, and when he finally approached the unlikely family gathering in the garden, his face showed a mix of wonder and something that looked like relief. "She looks like the baby pictures of me," he said quietly, addressing no one in particular. "Grandma used to show me photos of Dad when he was little, and she looks exactly like him." The acknowledgement from Daniel seemed to break something loose in Lucas. Here was his son, the child he'd fought so hard to keep, embracing the existence of a sister he'd never known about. Daniel had grown up as an only child in a world of privilege, but there was genuine joy in his eyes as he looked at Sophia. "I always wanted a sister," he admitted, and for the first time that evening, Sophia smiled. What happened next will probably go down in Hartford family history as either the bravest or most foolish thing Lucas ever did. Walking back into the reception with Sophia's small hand in his, he approached the microphone that had been set up for toasts. The orchestra stopped playing, conversations died, and 500 of the most influential people in the country turned to listen to whatever Lucas Hartford was about to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried across the suddenly silent crowd, "I'd like you to meet my daughter Sophia. I've missed the first 12 years of her life, but I don't intend to miss any more." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly applause began, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Daniel was the first to reach them, wrapping his arms around his newfound sister. Even Victoria, the bride who should have been the center of attention, seemed genuinely moved by the unexpected addition to her new family. But Celeste was nowhere to be found. Her champagne glass sat abandoned on a table, her designer clutch missing from the coat check. The woman who had orchestrated this entire reunion by suggesting Natalie be invited had disappeared the moment her carefully constructed world began to crumble. Justice, it seemed, had a sense of irony that even Hollywood couldn't script. The invitation meant to display Celeste's confidence had instead exposed her deception and brought Lucas face to face with the daughter he never knew he had. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door, it RSVPs to your son's wedding and arrives with a 12-year-old truth that changes everything. And there you have it, one of the most incredible examples of karma I've ever encountered. A single wedding invitation, meant as a gesture of magnanimous forgiveness, became the instrument of justice that had been 13 years in the making. Lucas Hartford thought he could rewrite his history by erasing the people who reminded him of his past, but the universe had other plans. Sometimes the truth doesn't just surface, it walks into your son's wedding, wearing a white dress and carrying your DNA in every feature. What strikes me most about this story isn't just the dramatic revelation or even the poetic justice of it all. It's Sophia herself, a 12-year-old girl who handled this impossible situation with more grace and wisdom than any of the adults around her. She didn't ask to be the secret that destroyed a marriage or the truth that rebuilt a family. She was simply herself, and that was enough to change everything. I have to ask you, what do you think about Lucas's decision to publicly acknowledge Sophia at his son's wedding? Was it the right move, or should he have handled it more privately? And what about Natalie? Do you think she was wrong to keep Sophia's paternity a secret for all those years, even after Celeste intercepted her attempts to reach Lucas? Some of you might argue she was protecting her daughter from a man who had already proven he could be ruthless when it came to custody battles. Others might say every child deserves to know their father, regardless of the complications. Here's what I find fascinating about this whole situation. Celeste's plan backfired in the most spectacular way possible. She wanted to appear gracious and secure by inviting the ex-wife, but instead she handed Lucas the key to discovering a daughter he never knew existed. The very confidence that made her suggest the invitation was the same arrogance that led to her downfall. That's karma working on a level that's almost artistic in its precision. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, wondering what would happen next, then you absolutely need to hit that like button right now. Stories like this one, where family secrets collide with consequences, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where children end up being wiser than the adults who created the mess, these are the stories that remind us how complex and unpredictable life really is. And if you're sitting there thinking about your own family secrets, your own moments where the truth almost came out, or times when you've seen karma work its magic in real time, then you're exactly the kind of person who needs to subscribe to this channel. I've got dozens more stories just like this one. Tales of justice served cold, of family drama that would make soap opera writers weep with envy, and of ordinary people whose lives took extraordinary turns because someone, somewhere, decided that the truth was more important than keeping the peace. The comments section is going to be wild on this one, and I want to hear from all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where a family secret came out at the worst possible moment? Have you seen karma work this perfectly in your own life? Or maybe you're Team Celeste, and you think Lucas got what he deserved for abandoning his first wife in the first place. Whatever your take, drop it in the comments because these discussions are what make this community so incredible. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a good family drama story or believes in the power of truth to eventually surface. Trust me, this is the kind of story people will be talking about long after they've watched it. Until next time, remember, some secrets are too big to stay buried forever, and sometimes the most innocent invitation can change absolutely everything.